You're listening to The Powell Movement.
Welcome to The Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have a former athlete who doesn't have a sport anymore. Yes, it's another rollerblading episode, and my guest is one of the absolute legends of the sport. I have Aaron Feinberg on the show, and Aaron is known for a lot of things. Talking is not one of them. He doesn't do interviews, but wanted to tell his story. He told me the only reason he even considered doing this was because I was always cool with him back in the day, which means I most likely had extra papers on me that I was willing to share. And he felt he owed it to his fans, which is pretty cool. Before I talk to Aaron, I want to thank you for listening and ask you to follow me on Instagram, share my posts on Facebook, and give me a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to me on. If you really want to support the show, I have Powell Movement hats over on the powellmovement.com website. And if you have any show feedback or just want to shoot the shit over email, my email address is mike@thepowellmovement.com. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors who make the show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Aaron Feinberg. I'm here with Aaron Feinberg, and Aaron, you are the second Jewish guest I've had on the podcast. That is very exciting to me.
Interview's over. Religion has nothing to do with... No, I'm just joking. You're looking at me all serious.
I'm like, come on, man. Because in the world of sports, there aren't many Jewish stars of sport across anything. I think there's probably been like 23 ever. Arlo was one. You happen to be one. Are you really Jewish, or were you just born Jewish and forgot about it?
Well, I was going to say, apparently that might be because this guy Hitler might have tried to knock out a big part of our race. So it's the one thing that's a religion and a race. So when you ask me that question, it's like, well, yeah, I'm Jewish as a race, but in terms of the way religion goes, I've been across the board and have all sorts of thoughts on that, I guess.
Are you a religious person by any means, or do you have deep thoughts about religion?
I guess like the more I've kind of seeked truth, and ironically, I've always been against the Bible, and well, I don't want to say against the Bible, but I've never been into it anyways. And the vibe I've gotten from a lot of Christians growing up deterred me from it. The church environment I wasn't into. And I guess that goes with Judaism too, to a certain extent. I mean, celebrating things with the family is different, but when you're in that church environment and certain notions are kind of being forced down your throat, makes you gotta form your own opinion.
I don't think things are forced down your throat in Judaism, but I'll leave that at that.
Well...
And that is more of a joke than anything, Aaron. A really bad one.
Yeah, you know, religion's a weird thing. I don't know why we jumped right into that off the bat.
Because you're Jewish, man.
It's the one thing that's a religion and a race. And I visited Israel probably like 8 years ago.
Birthright?
Birthright.
Nice. So you got a free trip to Israel.
Yeah.
I did not know about that. I missed out on it completely.
It's pretty awesome, yeah. So, you know, we got to travel around, all expense paid on someone else's dime, and it was eye-opening, though. I got to see Judaism as more of a race than just a religion, just by being out there and seeing people that remind me of my own family and other Jewish people, you know.
Huh. Were you bar mitzvahed?
I was. My younger brother wasn't, but I was, and my older brother was. Although we were never really all that religious, it was important to, like, my grandfather and my parents.
And how much did you clear after your bar mitzvah party, and what was the theme?
1.2 mil, and then after... No, just joking. No, my family's never been very wealthy, so it was more of a tradition than anything else.
Did you have a theme for your bar mitzvah?
No, not so much.
Did they make buttons with a picture of a cutout of Aaron?
Mostly just memorizing the prayers, of course, understanding what they mean to a certain extent, but all I really remember is the Baruch Atah Elonai Eloheinu Melech Shalom, something.
I got one too. Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed. That was part of my bar mitzvah. I just might edit that out because no one needs to hear about this much religion. But I wanted to talk about it a little bit, but born in Gainesville, Florida and raised in Miami?
Yeah, Gainesville, Florida, raised in Miami. Ironically, I was conceived in Puerto Rico. My mom was studying to become a midwife, and at the time in Puerto Rico, they didn't have the whole like midwifery, natural birth center kind of things. that she was studying for. So we flew to Florida to be born in a natural birth center, then back to Puerto Rico, where I spent the first 2.5, 3 years of my life.
Natural birth, are your parents hippies a little bit, or is there some kind of element that you grew up with?
Definitely. My parents are ex-hippies.
Ex-hippies in Miami, Florida. You've got an older brother, a younger brother, and like what kind of kid are you growing up?
Kind of little hood rats. We just lived down the street from our elementary school, and we ventured around a lot. Miami's kind of diverse, as you know, and like 5 blocks one way, I'm in what we call the Black Grove, where white people aren't allowed to be unless you're with other black people. And then, 5 blocks the other direction is some serious wealth. So, not only is it racially diverse, you got a lot of poor and rich people mingled all next to each other kind of deal.
Growing up, did you play any team sports?
I was never too into the whole team sport environment that much. I grew up doing Taekwondo, and that directly correlates into my skating. My instructor was kind of like a second father-like figure too, and taught me discipline, taught me respect, taught me the things that martial arts can positively be embedded into you, basically, and it carried right over into my skating.
What level did you make it in Taekwondo?
I won the Junior Olympics. I placed in the Pan Am Games and World Cup. It's basically at the top of my game, but below 18, so I wasn't fighting like the world-class athletes. But I got to the point where, for my age group, I was competing against the best in the world, the Koreans, in other words.
Wow, I had no idea that you were that good at Taekwondo, and I guess there's probably a decision that has to be made at one point in your life. Which direction do I go? But with Taekwondo and being badass, have you ever gotten any fights where you've used your Taekwondo skills?
I mean, of course, it's going to naturally tie into the way you move and fight and stuff, but never really got it to that point. I guess even at a young age, I realized how lethal the stuff that I was practicing was, and how you better have a reason to be using a lot of that shit if you're going to.
I would even say into your older age, I mean, you're not afraid to go out and have a few cold ones with the crew when you're traveling, and you're with boisterous crews all the time. I'm sure that can rub people the wrong way, and I'm sure there were incidents here and there. You don't seem like a fighter. You're like as chill as a person that can possibly be, kind of quiet, and then when push comes to shove and people have to lay down, you got like the Pan American World X Games Taekwondo champion.
Yeah. I didn't really feed into it that much. Like you said, I'm not really a fighter, and usually fights are over stupid stuff, so I'm more the person being like, hey, let's look at the subject matter here, be adults kind of deal.
Growing up, I'm guessing you were like a small kid.
Yes, I was still small.
You're not huge today, but you're average pretty much. You're what, like 5'6", 5'7"?
5'4.5".
Well, from my huge height of 5'9", which I think I'm really 5'8.5", I thought you were 5'6". But growing up, were you the little Taekwondo kid that was fighting people? I mean, I don't know if they do it by weight.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of ignorant about it at first. I recall like in grade school kind of being like, I'm not scared of this big fat black guy talking shit to me, and I learned my lesson real quick. Be careful with your talents kind of deal. I took a good punch to the stomach, and I was like, all right, I need to get a little better at this Taekwondo before I go trying to pick on people. But that was a different mentality when I was really young, and if anything, what Taekwondo did for me was taught me discipline and respect, among many other great features. I mean, Taekwondo is, I guess it applies to any martial art or whatever, but it's about creating that balance in your life and being closer to the whole mind-body aspect of physicality.
As you've gotten older, just hearing you talk about this, are you into yoga and things like that as well?
Yeah, a little bit. I got into it for a second when I lived in California with Dustin. I never got that much into the stretching thing, but he was teaching me a lot of the breathing techniques and stuff, and it was actually interesting. I mean, it definitely ties into it. I should have more of that kind of thing in my life right now, but I do get enough exercise to find a good balance anyway.
So you're a small kid who finds rollerblading at about 11, which is probably 1992-ish, which is right when everything's about to blow up. People know about the sport, and it's coming on as the biggest trend that becomes a sport in the world. And it went from 0 to 22 million skaters a year in like 5 years. How do you get into rollerblading?
So, friend of mine, trying to think of what we really did before we skated, but one day he got a pair of rollerblades. They were probably Veriflex or something like that, and we both tried them, and it was fun. At first, I was kind of like, is that fun? That was cool. Like, I never even heard of them, so we like both had one on running around the street or whatever, and my first pair of skates was like the black and lime green, like Veriflex skates, and it was just about transportation and hopping on the Metro Rail and just cruising the city. And one day, I guess, we ran into a couple people riding stairs, and that's where it all kind of turned into something serious. To realize how much more it had to offer at that point, I had no idea. And after doing the stair rides and like learning it that day, and then coming across videos like Mad Beef and Hoax, it was a life changer.
You say that you were out cruising out and about in the city. You're in Miami at this point. You're 11 years old. And was the house so loose that they let you just free range it like that? I know it was a different era as well, but it's still Miami. There's crazy shit going on everywhere.
Yeah, like I said, we were kind of hood rats just running around town. I didn't really have that strict of guidelines. As a matter of fact, my parents were supportive of me dropping out of high school like halfway through my sophomore year because I was following my passion, and they understood that.
A year or so of skating in Miami is what you get. Do you meet any of the skaters in that area when you're there, or do you meet them later on?
There was some skaters, and I guess I met them all pretty much. It was a small niche at that point. I had maybe 3 or 4 friends that we started out kind of skating and watching videos, and it went from there. Once I started getting pretty good at it, I was at the same time still 100% in the Taekwondo and thinking that's something that's going to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. And I kind of set it aside because I had this new rollerblading passion, and I went that direction, But I definitely owe Taekwondo everything for it.
At this point in your life, you've got the split with Taekwondo and rollerblading, but you've only been skating for a year when you're about 12, and then you moved to Portland, Oregon. And I would think that 12 years old is a pretty impressionable time. You've established who your friends are. You've established what life is. You have sun in Miami. You have the weather in Miami. There's a lot of great things about Miami. And then you move to this place, Portland, which isn't even on the map when you move out there, I don't feel like. It's not the Portland that it's known for today. Were you pissed, or were you just like kind of go with the family vibe of whatever we're going to do?
Yeah, it was a hard transition at first, but skating at that point was really important to me, and it was such a small industry that was all based in California. And at that point, I was already serious enough about it that I knew moving to the West Coast was going to be huge for me because I didn't have the opportunities on the East Coast being so far from the industry. And Portland being closer to California made a big difference, and bigger scene out here in general.
That's kind of surprising to me that there's a bigger scene in Portland than there is in Miami, because it seemed like inline skating wasn't invented in Miami, but the culture definitely came up, a different side of the culture. The fitness culture came up in Miami. So I would think there'd be a lot of people that were doing the, for lack of a better term, aggressive stuff too.
Yeah, one of the first big things that I saw on Miami Beach, Chris Edwards and the rollerblading team were out there, and that was the first time I saw like the real pro deal kind of thing. So at the time, the sport is so young and the industry is literally just in California. It was a blessing in disguise for me. It was perfect timing to get to the West Coast.
So your transition when you get to Portland, is it uncomfortable, or do you meet people right away because you're a good skater and that really helps?
Well, yeah, I went out there, where's the skaters kind of deal. There's a place called Skidmore something over there by the Skidmore Fountain where the market is. There's a small shop there that started carrying rollerblades. We'd meet there and skate around, and then Sportworks down the street was another alternative sport, snowboard, ski, and all that. Started carrying skates. So yeah, if you're a rollerblader at that time in Portland, you knew everyone else that was a rollerblader in Portland as well, right?
Yeah. So that makes your transition a lot easier here because you're insanely talented at rollerblading, and then you've got Taekwondo. What else are you insanely talented at? Because when I ask about Taekwondo and you're like a world champion, and then rollerblading as well, are there other things that you're really, really, really good at?
Anything that I apply myself to, I'm going to be at least decent at pretty much, but those were the main passions that I had in my life. I dabbled in snowboarding and skiing.
Skating progresses really fast for you. From 11, you get your first pair of skates. 3 to 4 years later, you're getting some sponsors. And how does your whole sponsorship thing evolve? Like, who sees you first? Who gives you product first? And how does that happen?
So I think Kryptonics was my first sponsor. What was her name? Kate. The rep that was over there at the time. I should not forget her name. How did that even work? It had to do with meeting the right people in Miami NIS, back in the old NIS series. But yeah, Kryptonics was the first company that started floating me wheels and stuff like that. And it was over a few years of really proving myself and getting my name out there. But I literally grew with the industry side by side kind of deal,
Yeah, and those days are all about contests for you, right? I mean, you're probably skating street with some people, but you're building your name through the contest scene, and the contest scene is really, really big back then.
Yeah, I feel like at the time, to get the big sponsors and be amongst the big names, contests were really important, because you're actually on TV and stuff. But, street skating was where my heart was, but I got a lot better at ramps and all of that just to kind of expand myself. I, at one point, qualified for vert finals in X Games. So I was an all-around, skater kind of deal. But although it may look like to most people on the outside that I was more of a contest skater, that all came from the streets.
You have a natural ability to pump a transition and boost them. I mean, I just think back to the spines at Skate Barn and seeing you do stuff that no one could ever even mess with. And you were always just fucking around. It wasn't like you're even trying. And all the video parts that you put together, I mean, they cemented you as the top of street skating at the time. The one thing you didn't have was the big personality that really made people be like, Aaron Feinberg this and Aaron Feinberg that. And it's really easy to pigeonhole you as a park skater when you win your first X Games on your 16th birthday, which is fucking crazy.
Yeah, it was just a natural thing occurring. I mean, I wanted to be on top of my game. I put everything into it, and the results kind of show that. I mean, to get to that level in anything that you're practicing, you're not going to just dabble around here and there. You're committing a lot to it,
How often are you skating? Every day for 3-4 hours a day?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, sometimes we would, when I'm on tour, skating a lot more than 3-4 hours a day, I guess. You can't help but need to get a day off here and there for your body to recover. I mean, injuries are nonstop.
But one thing I would say about you, and I can't say for every rollerblader, is you knew your role. When you showed up at a demo, you skated from start to finish, unless you were hurt. But I mean, I never really saw you hurt. I knew you of times you were hurt. You didn't miss flights. You showed up at contests. You weren't that dude who was too cool and wasn't going to skate. It was almost to me, because I did see you as kind of a quiet guy, and thinking back to it now, it was almost like if you were skating, you didn't have to be talking to anybody, doing anything. You could just be in your own head out there skating.
Yeah, well, skating was my world, and it's weird looking back now, but at the time, there wasn't really any other reason for me to be putting any more focus into anything else in my life, where now, being older and mature, I mean, I wouldn't change things, but I could realize that you could miss out on a lot by committing too much to one thing.
Well, I would say that you are in the unique situation where you committed a lot to one thing that was the biggest thing in the world. And I always sound like a broken record when I bring up what's happened to rollerblading, but the bottom dropped out. If it was like all the other sports, spending all that time focusing on your craft would be paying off still, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. So I'm not thinking that you were spending too much time on one thing, because it was your passion and it was going to be your future. But at the time, you're a sophomore in high school, and do you come to your parents with the idea of like, hey, I'm a pro now, I'm on this tour, because I'm guessing you had qualified for the ASA tour right about then?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I was already traveling like 6 months out of the year, and no high school is going to let you graduate with that kind of attendance. And it was an easy conversation. My mom right away was just like, yeah. I mean, who has the opportunity at that age to travel the world, all expense paid, and make good money doing it? School is not that important.
Are you hooked up with Salomon at this point when you drop out of high school?
I can't even remember exactly, but probably, I want to say, or at least I was a part of their development team at the early stages where we were actually developing the product.
Okay, before we get into Salomon and talking about sponsors and money, I am going to talk about sponsors and money, or my sponsors. And my first sponsor is Evo, and they are hands down the best retail location in the country for bike, skate, wake, surf, lifestyle, and more. And they have everything you could possibly want for your adventure. I have personally shopped at Evo since they opened because no one comes close to the service they offer and the vibe they create. Their stores in Denver, Seattle, and Portland are some of the best retail experiences you'll find. And if you can't make it to a store, well, Evo.com has all the brands, all the products, and a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy. For listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. If you're in-store, mention the code TPM10 to your cashier. And if you're online, use the code TPM10, that's all one word with capital letters, and you'll get that 10% off. My next sponsor is Rescue Water. And now that it's summer, hydrating is more important than ever. And with Rescue Water, it's all about proactive recovery. You're probably asking yourself, what does proactive recovery even mean? Well, think of it like this. If you really need energy, you skip the coffee and go straight to an energy drink. It's a similar principle with Rescue Water. When you really need to hydrate, like when you get off the trail, out of the skate park, done at the gym, or with your run, skip the traditional sports drink and try a Rescue Water. It's science and it works. And while this is an advertisement, I really do drink Rescue Water at the end of big nights. And for me, hangovers are a thing of the past. If you've been listening to the podcast and haven't tried a Rescue Water yet, do me a favor and buy one next time you're at the store. It will make you a believer, and you can thank me later. If you don't want to go to the store, check out rescuewater.com, that's RESQ water.com, and save 20% on a 12-pack case with the code RESQWaterTPM, that is all one word. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. There are so many things I can say about 10 Barrel. But first and foremost, they have amazing beer. My personal favorite is the Out of Office Pilsner, but a close second is the wildly popular pub beer. While 10 Barrel is all about beer, their roots are in action sports, and they put their money where their heart is. And you can see that in the athletes and events they sponsor, but most importantly, this podcast. Support the beer that supports action sports, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more about the beers and events over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, and we can get back into it. We're talking about Salomon, who them and K2 came in from the outside world of skiing, and they came in and put a lot of resources into it. And Salomon was known for having the best fitting ski boot on the planet at that time. They knew feet, they still know feet, and they wanted to make sure that their inline skate, because that's what Salomon would call it, their inline skate collection came out just like that, but badass. So they involve you in all the development of the product. They actually listen.
Yeah, I wasn't there from the very beginning of the development, but Mike Burke and Nick Riggle and Matt Andrews, the three names that pop in my head that were there before me. And I gained interest at some point. I think it was mainly through talking with Mike Burke somewhere. And yeah, I mean, they definitely listened to us and listened closely to us. They had their engineers at the table with us from the very start. They did a good job at involving us with development of the product, that's for sure.
And they were not afraid to spend money, not on the product, not on the team, not on the marketing, especially in those days. They had a plethora of dollars, it seemed like. And the pro team was compensated, I would think, best in class in the industry. And you were the crown jewel of the pro team. And I don't know if that happens on a second contract, but I mean, what do you sign for with Salomon at first, if you don't mind me asking?
I think it was around $3,000 or $3,500 a month or so. I mean, that's like the base salary, and then they had a bonus system for like qualifying or placing in the competitions. They took really good care of us for sure, and that goes for when we were traveling, the hotels they were putting us up in, and the money they were giving us per day just to eat and have a good time. Yeah, they definitely took better care of their team than anyone else at the time.
They do that across the board. They make sure their athletes are taken care of. And they were a big push for Aaron Feinberg, the athlete. They gave you a pro model. And when I say they gave you, you earned a pro model with them. With a royalty on a pro model, what do you get?
I can't even remember exactly what it was. I think we just kind of agreed on a number to slap on top of the contract. But, money-wise, I made over $100,000 a year for good 4 or 5 years and don't have all that much to show for it now, but I lived lavishly for a while, at a young age, it feels like a lot of money.
When you achieve that much success at a young age and you think there's a huge future in what you're doing and you're on the top of it, you spend money because you're 16 and you're not smart enough, I guess, to save it. Because you look back now and you're probably like, you might not change some things, but you might not have bought some things. You might have saved a little bit.
Yeah, I was never really that stupid with money, but yeah, I mean, you're nearsighted at that age.
What kind of car did you have?
Okay, I guess I was a little stupid with money. I dumped some money in the cars and stuff. I never got out of control with it. I had a good head on my shoulders. I didn't feel like I let money change me too much, but I did get enough of a sample taste of fame to realize if I would have progressed from there and gotten more rich and famous or whatever, it may have not been the best turn in my life at the point. Kind of look at it as a blessing to get to experience just enough without all the pitfalls,
Yeah. We'll talk about the X Games now. And that's your Olympics because these sports aren't in the Olympics, and the X Games are looked at with authenticity back then. It wasn't like a contest where you think of it as a marketing festival. You thought of it as an important event, and I would think with contests, did you go into it like, hey, I'm going to win this thing, or you just go in there, I'm going to skate hard? Were you competitive? What were you all about?
Of course, you always want to try and win, but it's all just calculated and to the point where you're just trying to do the best that you can. You're only competing against yourself. It's an individual sport kind of deal. And we're all feeding off of each other's energy and progressing at the same time. There's never really that hard of feelings. If you miss a trick and get second, third, fourth, whatever, even though you're trying your hardest, or you could land everything and be trying your hardest. We had enough respect amongst each other as pro skaters that vibe was never there. I just had a strong drive to do my best, and that's what I did.
You're 16, you said you grew up watching Hoax and a lot of the videos that were out at the time. You've competed with a lot of these guys before, but when you go to the X Games, is there like a holy shit moment? Like, wow, this is the top of my sport?
Yeah, it's weird overlapping from being a fan of all the pros to skating amongst them. It's kind of a big T-dog like Chris Haffey, I watched his broadcast a little bit and brought me back to those times. And yeah, for me, Arlo Eisenberg was huge, like in Mad Beef and Brian Smith. But it was the younger guys that really drew my attention, like Corey Nelson and Randy Spicer, that it's like, I want to be just like those guys kind of thing. But yeah, I never really fully grew out of the T-Dog phase, I guess, where you're always striving to be better thing. It was always kind of embedded in me as being an underdog, I guess.
Is being small ever part of that? You always have something to prove because you're like the little guy around?
You could say I have a little bit of the small man complex, but really it's all an attitude. It wasn't really ever about proving height at that point. It's all just skill level with skating. I mean, you don't have to be a certain height or anything.
No, but I mean, in life, you just get shit here and there. There used to be these things called bullies, and I would think they'd pick on the small kid at times, not knowing that the small kid could kick the living shit out of them.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess the judgment's coming from people that are like, what are you going to do? You can't even jump that high on the rail or whatever. I mean, it's the same attitude of showing people wrong kind of deal.
You're 16, probably 85 to 90 pounds, and you win your first X Games, and it was like 1997. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
The crowd sings you a happy birthday. Whenever you think about it, to just like run chills down your spine. Is that one of the better days of your life?
Yeah, everything kind of slowed down with the whole happy birthday. It was definitely a moment. The fact that it landed on my birthday and everything just went so smoothly for me. So the judging criteria was they take the score from the best of your two runs. And I believe I qualified in first, so I skated last out of the first 10 in the finals and got the highest score. And then I skated last in the second run portion, and my score was still the highest. So I got to take a victory lap, and it was a good feeling to be out there, especially with Arlo Eisenberg and watching him in the X Games before it, and it happened really quick. Started with the Florida Trials thing. I don't remember the name of the event or anything. I would have never expected to win it, though. That took me for a loop for a second.
Yeah, it was bringing on the future and a new type of skater. You're kind of the second generation, maybe even third. I don't know. I mean, if you put Arlo and Chris in one group and then like your Randys and Louis in the second, then maybe you come along third and kind of redefine the game. We're talking about contests, but I look at Mind Game, and Shane Coburn was a different kind of marketer. He did everything better than everybody else in rollerblading, and he understood everything about the sport and what kids wanted. So Mind Game is the path that helps you break away from being pigeonholed as a park skater, because it's easy to do that when you're traveling to 15 contests all over the world and you're doing well at all of them, and then you win the X Games.
I was still kind of had the more of a contest skater image, more of a corporate skater image thing going. Mind Game was more like street roots oriented, trying to veer away from that part of the industry. It was honestly more me trying to follow that path and follow in the footsteps of the skaters that I admired at the time. And I wanted to be respected as, one of the best street skaters, not just one of the best contest skaters. And I kind of had to prove that to the Mind Game team, to be honest. I mean, I think the first impression when I even brought up riding for Mind Game with Dustin was kind of like, I don't know, I think we have our niche, kind of thing. And after skating with him enough, he changed his mind, kind of deal.
So when you get on a brand like that, I mean, the image has to be important to you. I guess looking at you, you really didn't have an image. I mean, maybe it was a park skater image, but it wasn't like you were Josh Petty. It wasn't like you were a Shima. It wasn't like you had that image that kids were like, that guy's the coolest. You let your skating do the talking. And it always did. And then associating yourself with a brand that is known for the street realm adds credibility to you immediately. And then you prove that it's totally worth putting you on the team.
Yeah. Lost my train of thought. What was I thinking about? Where were we?
We were talking about Mind Game creating an avenue for you to be looked at as more of a street skater.
Oh, well, I guess I was trying to defend myself when you said I didn't really have an image. And I was thinking I had a different image to so many different people. I enjoyed it, though, giving different people different impressions of who I was, kind of thing. I mean, I got to use my name and likeness the way I wanted to. And it was fun to hear different people say complete different things about me. And in the bigger picture, though, you do have a point. Like, I always kind of stayed reserved to myself and never really wanted to make big impressions to take the stage, kind of thing.
But you always did, but it was with skating. And that's what kids were in awe of.
My skating talk, of course, but...
Other than that, if I saw you, and I mean, this is legal now, we can totally talk about it if you're comfortable with it, but I would say you were either skating wherever we were, or you were looking for a place to twist a joint and smoke it, and you were not trying to talk to as many people as possible. And there's nothing wrong with that because you were skating the whole time. Yeah.
The pressure can get pretty tough with competitions, and one slight move can be a career ender with injuries, and Pot was there to keep me calm and collective,
When did you start smoking weed?
I guess it was more after I moved from Florida, once you turn 13, 14, 15 kind of deal. It was important to me, and it was important to me in my skating career and the competitions I skated in. Just takes a hit off the wrong strain and you might fall. No, but for me, weed has always been a positive influence for me and coping with the stress of skating, traveling all the time.
But weed, I mean, I get that it takes the stress off, but in terms of life, I mean, there are some years I'm sure where people are traveling with stuff, but let's say you fly to Europe, you're going to land. Is the first thing you're going to do when you land, like, hey, we're going to get a bag of weed, and once we have that set, then we'll figure out what we're going to do for dinner and where we're going to skate tomorrow? Man,
I was dumb. I traveled to France with a half ounce in my pocket.
Jesus.
That was a silly one. Matt Andrews can contest to that one. We had to smoke a lot in about a 3-day period.
So to you were going to make sure wherever you arrived, you either had weed available when you got there, you had a dude who was going to hook you up, or you're going to travel with it, and it was just your beer, but you couldn't buy it at the store.
Right. And, I mean, anyone that knows how bad drugs and alcohol can be in your life knows that it's ridiculous that weed is even thrown into that category so often. I mean, I always looked at weed as not being a drug, or at least not putting that connotation on it with all the other negative stuff. And it's always been a positive thing for me. Taking a break here and there, of course, is great too. And, messing with your memory, frying your brains, being high all the time is no good, but it can definitely be used as a positive tool for a lot of people.
And now that it's legal, there's a lot of different ways you can have your weed. You can smoke it, you can vape it, you can dab it, you can eat it. It's in lubrication. It's everywhere. And I don't really care if you use it with lubrication. You don't need to share that part with us. But what do you like to purchase when you go to the store?
Flower always. I always just smoke spliffs. It's kind of just one of those things that's probably going to stick with me for the rest of my life. It's more just like the force of habit, what you're used to, how you enjoy it. And that's just kind of stuck with me. I got the opportunity to learn how to roll joints from some of the best Europeans at the time. And that's my preference for smoking anyways. And, smoking out a glass pipe usually looks a bit cracky and you get resin and stuff down your throat.
That's true. One thing that is weird, because you're an athlete, and when I say that, being a street skater, I don't really think you need to be fully fitness athlete. You can take your breaks. But you qualified for X Games finals in vert. That means you can skate a lot of walls, and you had the energy to be able to do that, which is a hard thing to do. It's different than just skating your street run, but you smoke cigarettes too. And I just don't know how you're able to skate as hard as you were able to do, because I'm sure all the smoking stuff started kind of early, and with hippie parents, you're probably not getting in trouble.
Probably helped breathing all that hot, nasty Florida air all those years,
It just prepped your lungs for what you were going to do to them later on.
I'm just thinking, if you could skate in that weather sometimes, then cigarette's not going to stop you.
How does Salomon end for you? Because you're with them and they're a great brand, but they exit the inline world. And I know there was a K2 patent at one point that really fucked them with all their fitness skates. And I worked for K2, so I'm not going to chuckle, but it's funny when you don't work around the patents. What was the end like for Salomon?
So the industry is starting to slow down.
2003-ish?
Sounds about right. I remember certain skaters were kind of getting the boot or getting pay cuts, and I had to make a career choice with the direction I was trying to go in, and I was kind of putting money aside. I would make more money if I stuck with Salomon at that point, but I looked at a bigger picture where I wanted to travel with Team USD, and they were there for me, and that was a good transition for me because it gave me kind of a second throw at skating, because things for me at the time were kind of phasing out passion-wise, but it came back with USD at the time.
You go from the corporate company in skating who really does a great job of taking care of their athletes to USD, which I'm not saying they don't do a great job of taking care of their athletes, but you probably go from the West End to Motel 6.
Yep, that's exactly what it was like, but that's what the whole industry did,
Yeah, but I'm sure the Salomon guys were still going to the West End.
Well,
but they weren't in the game that much longer.
For me, it was like I preferred using those skates. I preferred traveling with those guys I was hanging out with most of the time anyways.
How do you get along with Nikki Adams?
Nikki Adams is always really cool. I mean, he's one of those guys that's going to be talented at whatever he does,
Yeah.
And he showed that with skiing, and it was cool. I got to travel to Winter X Games one year and watch all those guys do that. It was a different experience being on the sideline,
You go to USD, and that's real street compared to Salomon's cushy liners. People look at USD with like a reverence. The team that they have is what kids are putting on their walls if they still did that back then. Salomon is like, hey, you're going to get a big, glossy, perfect poster of Aaron at a movie stop once a year. And, we're going to put them all over our boxes. But USD is like, hey, we're going to showcase this guy skating. And it's all about the skating with them. And it's all about being raw and more street than everything else that you've done in your life up until then.
Yeah, it continued my passion because it was kind of like I've ventured all parts of the industry, skated all kinds of, whether it's park or street or whatever, but I never got the full recognition from the street community at the time that I felt like I deserved, and that was where I was at with going that direction of Mind Game and USD, and it's literally just me saying this is what I want to do and working towards that. There's no one really influencing me at the time, and I was always my own manager kind of thing.
And did you look at message boards? Because BMAG was big back then. And were you looking at them and seeing what people were talking about you? And is that motivating you too?
Yeah, especially when I was first getting into it and like I was starting to build a name. I was on the AOL message boards like, hey, have you heard of Aaron Feinberg? What do you think of that guy? Like having fun with it. And, part of that is kind of feeding into your ego or whatever. But if you're going to get to that level or where you want to be one of the very best, you have to be your number one fan, and that requires feeding into your ego a little bit,
Yeah, and it's crazy how it's changed, because if technology were at the point where we are today in the height of your skating career, you would have to be doing a whole lot more of, hey, look at me, hey, look at me. And while maybe you're doing that as a young kid for a reaction to see what people thought of you, I don't look at you as maybe the biggest self-promoter. If Facebook and Instagram were huge back when you were a pro, I don't see you posting 5 times a day and doing everything that everybody wants you to do in that.
I mean, I was into those chat rooms and stuff back in the AOL days, but ever since Facebook has started growing in that whole online networking or what have you, I've always wanted to sort of deter from that. I think the last time I've updated my Facebook page was in like 1992 or 93. I don't like the idea of putting labels on people, and the whole psychological concept of you get to a certain age and that's kind of who you are. I like to give life more of a perspective where there's always room for change.
And how's your body at this point? I know you've had ankle issues, and do you still have ankle issues?
Yeah, anyone that gives me shit these days for not skating, I mean, that's my number one excuse is injuries. Put enough into it and you fall the same way enough times and get enough reoccurring injuries where every time you get the same injury, you ask yourself, why am I still doing this?
How did you hurt your ankle the first time?
Oh, I can't even remember. My memory is not very clear, and at the time it wasn't either. I've never paid that much attention to the dates and times.
Concussions and weed?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, but I can't remember. It's not something I really think about. I mean, the big career ender for me in terms of injuries, or the most significant injury that I had, was the last ankle break I had at the Milwaukee, Summerfest event for ASA. And I knew when I took that fall, it was kind of like I'm done. I mean, I recovered enough and I'm fine enough that I could perform, but it was enough for me to slow down. It wasn't like a typical break when you're 16 and you fracture your ankle and you're back skating 3 months later. It was a good year and a half, 2 years of being in serious recovery mode. I mean, a lot of bedtime and following doctor's orders that weren't exactly the best advice. And regardless, it's just when you get a bad ligament tear, it's nothing like a broken bone. It's so much more painful and so much longer to heal and come back from. But it was at a point where the industry was on a decline, and I like to think that I grew with the industry and died with it, kind of deal.
When you break that ankle, I mean, because you're in a hard boot skate at that point, I mean, I just think of being on the ground in terrible pain and then someone saying, hey, we have to take your skate off.
Taking the skate off wasn't all that difficult or painful, but it was just, nothing like a regular ankle break. I mean, there was a point where I was taking like 4 or 5 Vicodins a day dealing with the pain, and that's no way to go either.
Did that ever turn into a problem? Because you hear about people doing that. I mean, did that happen to you?
No, really. It gave me bad nightmares. I would wake up in dream states, and it was just bad all around. That big pharma stuff is no good. Just like a lot of drugs. Yeah, I remember one point, waking up. I was in like a dream on Vicodin, and I just felt myself expanding. So I'm not like a human shape or whatever. I'm just energy expanding, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, this is cool. It's kind of feels neat. And then the next thought was, wait, I'm not able to control this. I'm not able to get back smaller again. And it was like I was awake when it was going on, but I was able to like snap out of it and actually wake up, but not in a full awake state. And it was just one of those experiences where You better question what's in those Vicodins. I don't know. It wasn't like a spiritual thing. It was like a negative thing where like I kind of came out of it and was like trying to gather my marbles. But I think after that experience, I started using a lot more weed than Vicodin to deal with the pain.
And do you do any of the CBD weed or, because I don't mess with that stuff. I feel like that's medical.
Oh, CBD weed it's going to affect more like your body, I guess, like when you take edibles. But if I was looking for more of a body high, I would just eat edibles and smoke CBD. But to be honest, like all the strains that are supposedly high in CBD, they get me high just like smoking any other flower. So I don't know. But CBD definitely has all kinds of healing benefits. But the term CBD itself is kind of just one small part of all the different things, the chemical makeups that are in weed, and they're still learning how to separate all and define and all those different acronyms that go into weed. And you got to think at some point they're going to be able to do a lot more with weed than people are doing with it now by being able to dissect it further and apply it to different things.
I was going to talk about your video parts, but really, they're online and people can see them. And between Brain Fear Gone, Words, Accidental Machines, Ride Like Aaron, lots of great videos out there. And you had an amazing video career. And like you said, where you might have come up in the Ride Like Aaron days, you were able to totally 180 that image and become one of the most badass street skaters out there, as well as what you were able to do in the park. But we're not going to talk about that stuff because people can find that online. We are going to talk about what you replace skating with, because when it's your passion from when you're 11 and you had a passion before that of Taekwondo, you probably don't go back to Taekwondo. But I know rock climbing became something that you did a lot. And did you do that to fill the void of skating?
Yeah, I mean, basically just getting that adrenaline rush with whatever you're doing. It's just healthy to exercise and have that outlet. Rock climbing still is that for me. I don't get up as much as I'd like, but I play a lot of pool. It's not exercise, but it's something that I grew up doing with my dad when I was really young, and it's one of those things that if you're a serious pool player, you know what I mean, that it's a passion that doesn't really fade.
Do you play pool for money?
Yeah, it's just friendly stuff, or little tournaments, and I'm definitely nowhere near the professional threshold level. But it's something that, even though, like in sports, your body's going to deteriorate, it's the kind of sport that you can progress into your older age. Of course, there is a turning point. You start losing vision or whatnot, balance, but that's something that I hold close to. And riding my bicycle, road bike, like yesterday, I just kind of had a lot of different things on my mind or stress from work or whatever. Jump on my bike just to like go grab something to eat and end up riding like 30, 40 miles just because I enjoy it and getting that heart rate up and adrenaline going. I've always been a bit of an adrenaline junkie.
Pants are a big topic of a conversation on rollerblading message boards back in the day for some reason. But when I hear road biking, do you wear spandex when you road bike?
No, I've never gotten into it enough to get to that point. I've never actually put on the spandex. But there is a reason they wear that damn spandex. I've had some long bike rides where at the end I should have had some spandex on.
I think they make shorts with it built inside as well so you can hide them.
I don't wear jeans anyway.
Well, I would think that totally flies here in Portland, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just cruising around the city riding a fixed gear or whatever, but when you're going on long road bike rides, you're going to get uncomfortable if you're not wearing the right stuff.
For sure. And then, were you one of the skaters that was big into the online poker fad that went on for a while?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. That's always been a big hobby of mine, too.
Do you do well in that? Because, I mean, you can make some serious income doing it. Were you able to do that? Yeah, so at some point when I was transitioning from my rollerblade money, I was spending 10 hours a day on the computer playing poker, and I made a living doing it for a couple of years, paying my rent and bills, but it gets miserable. It makes you antisocial, vision blurry. But yeah, I was able to do it playing small stakes and putting my hours in. What small stakes? Like
playing within my bankroll, basically. So like as small as 25 cent, 50 cent games, but over the long stretch, I was averaging where I could make like $100 a day. And while taking swings, still kind of average that out, and then it was a job. But yeah, I feel like now it's more fun to just play live games. Or I'll get the itch sometimes to gamble a little bit online, but in general, man, these days we all stare at screens so much, it's not good for you.
It's funny, like I think I do a lot, but like the kids coming up today, they're glued to them way more than we will ever be.
And you could see it affecting their personalities, and you could see the negative energy that it brings out of people when they're staring at screens all day instead of nature and people.
Why? Are there bad things going on in our schools today?
Oh, that kind of stuff?
I'm kidding completely, and I shouldn't kid.
I hear you. Not a perfect world, I'll tell you, man.
And speaking of not perfect, in 2001, you had some clips that were put together. They were actually perfect. The person you worked with, Sean Cullen, I can say maybe not perfect by any means, but a very unique character in the rollerblade world, or probably in whatever world he's in. Were you friendly with him? Do you work with him?
He has some mixed reviews, right? But I've always gotten along with him, and I enjoy his presence and his uniqueness for sure. He's quite the character, and he's really smart as well.
Yeah, he's smart. I would say a hustler as well. He makes things happen. Sure. Like somehow he will end up in Europe with a $3,000 video camera and all kinds of things. And good for him. More power to him. But you had a lot of clips in the INRI video.
Yeah, at that point, I was already kind of done with skating. It's just whoever I was hanging out with at the time to motivate me. It was more him and Jeremy Townsend are two of the only people I think that really are able to motivate me to go skate with them.
And that's funny because Jeremy Townsend, he's a Seattle skater. He's done a lot for the skating community in Seattle. But maybe around 2002, I wouldn't think you would be friends with Jeremy at all, just based on his personality back then. And I knew him then. I know him now. He's a great guy.
You're 100% on it, yeah. And we weren't really that great of friends, but he's the kind of person that it takes a few years for him to grow on you, I guess.
Now I'm going to get into the final segment of the show. I call it Inappropriate Questions. Sometimes I call people and get them to ask you inappropriate questions, but sometimes I want to know some things, and this time I do want to know some things. We've talked about some of this throughout the show, but these questions will be more pointed. Do you ever think back to that time when you're on top of the world from 98 to 2002, where everything's happening for Aaron Feinberg, and then thinking about it today, like, how the fuck did I get to where I am today? And where are you today? What are you doing?
Oh, if you ask me two questions in one.
So first, where are you today and what are you doing? You're in Portland, obviously.
Yeah, so I work a few days a week, which works perfect for me because obviously working all the time sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works out good for me. I do long shifts a few days a week, work for big corporate junk removal company, and we do all kinds of done jobs in this building all over all the offices where they're moving or just getting rid of furniture and stuff, and also just residential jobs. We do house clean outs. It's not always fun work, but there's a lot of perks involved in it. We got a lot of power to do things the way we want to, how we want to. We're also subcontracted to pick up returns for a lot of online companies and for Costco. So we come up on a lot of nice brand new items that I'm able to support myself just selling stuff on my off days and only having to work a few days a week and having a good balance. I got into the job just thinking it was going to be a whatever job in the meantime, and I've been there for about 5.5 years now, I think.
Nice. So now my inappropriate question to this, are you ever moving stuff from a building into a truck and think back and be like, how the fuck did I get to the point where I'm moving something from a building to a truck? Because when I was 16, I thought someone would be moving my shit from a truck.
When you're
I mean, do you ever just think of it like that? Do you ever just think back like, it was so great and how, because I mean, you have a job now like everybody else. Right. But at one point, you might have thought you weren't going to have a job like somebody else.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. It was a slow process. I mean, I made enough money from skating that I was able to slowly transition, basically, and come into my own without a quick rude awakening or whatever. But at one point, I would think, like, I'm at a point where I'll probably meet more people and get involved in other big projects kind of thing. And it just didn't really happen that way. Everyone kind of got married and had kids and moved in their own directions. And a lot of relationships just kind of phased out. But yeah, it didn't happen overnight, and I was kind of blessed with that, having enough money financially to not just get thrown right into the real world. I was able to slowly live off of my money and realize how easy it is to spend money without a job, right?
Okay. Here's one relating to childhood. At one point in your life, you probably are making more money than your parents. And does that make you jaded? Do they treat you differently? Do you act differently? Do you ever change because you're Aaron Feinberg, the skater?
So I guess when my brothers, there's a little bit of tension and jealousy, and just growing up with the whole, you're used to being by your family all the time, then all of a sudden you're traveling half the year and you kind of lose some of that camaraderie. But I've also influenced his skating, and he's gone through a lot of skating with me. But from his perspective, Ruben, he dealt with a lot of people at the time. Like, it wasn't, hey, Ruben, how you doing? You still skating? He's like, hey, how's Aaron? Or where's Aaron? What's Aaron?
Like, people might not have known his name was Ruben. He was Aaron's brother.
Aaron's brother, right. And at the time, I was just kind of like, don't feed into jealousy kind of mentality. But, looking back, that can be annoying pretty quickly, right?
Are you guys tight now?
Oh, yeah, we're definitely tight. And in general, my family's always been really tight and supportive.
Okay, my final inappropriate question. What did you do with all the money?
It's so easy to spend money if you don't have a job, especially. I mean,
You buy a house?
That's what I should have done. But, I was traveling and I was young. That's probably my biggest regret, to, have to be paying rent now instead of living in a paid-for house that I could have at one point.
Were you the guy picking up bar tabs and stuff because you could?
Like I said, I wasn't that stupid with my money, just trying to, throw it around. BJ Campbell's name pops in my mind. He was more like that kind of mentality. But although I wasn't super smart with my money and my decisions at the time, I also wasn't that dumb about it. I used it to transition, from that world that I put so much into to the regular world, basically.
Well, I will say in any aspect of what you're skating, whether it was park, I don't think I ever saw you skate vert, but park and street skating, there was no one more fun to watch. Like, I brought up the spines at Skate Bar, and I just remember anytime I saw you hit a spine, it was like you're boosting so much higher than everybody else, and you just made it look fun. And even when it was like the most gnarly stunt, you still were able to make it look easy. And that's a tough thing to do. And I guess you're in the next chapter of your life, and we'll see where we'll go from there. But I thank you for your time, man.
All right, that went by quick. I appreciate it, Mike. It was an easier interview than I was working it up to be in my head.
Not a tough thing. It's just telling your story. Now let's go to 10 Barrel and have some food.
All right, sounds good.
So that was time with Aaron Feinberg, and what a roller coaster of a life that kid has lived. Imagine being 16 years old and on top of the world. At 16, I was an idiot. I couldn't do anything right. But Aaron was the best in class in his sport in the world. And when you're 16 and you see that, you've got to think that by the time you're 40, you're going to have millions of dollars in the bank and life is going to be easy. No one could forecast what was going to happen to rollerblading. Aaron said it better than anybody else. He lived and died with a sport. And while the sport is still going, it's a lot more underground now. There really isn't a feeder system to get kids into it. And I think that's the issue with rollerblading. Everything starts with kids and getting them hooked early. You could talk to any drug dealer and they'll let you know that. Well, it's the same with sport. And if rollerblading is ever going to come back, it's going to be getting those kids back into it and not missing a generation like we've already done once. So that was time with Aaron Feinberg, and that's my rant on rollerblading. Next week, we have our final Rollerblade episode of the year, and it's more of a business episode, and one of the biggest business episodes we'll talk about. I'm talking with John Julio, who is an icon. I would say he's bigger than a legend. He's an icon in the sport of rollerblading, and he's one of those guys who is making skater-owned a reality. He's had other brands that were backed by other brands, but now he's going out on his own, putting his life savings into a new product that is just delivered, them skates, and we'll talk to John about how scary it is to create a business from scratch in an industry that doesn't seem to be growing, because that's what John's doing, and I believe in him. He's run a ton of companies, and he's proven that he is great at marketing, and he's going to be able to succeed, but me saying that is one thing, John proving it is another. That's next week. Until then, I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. It really helps. And tell your friends about the show. That's how this thing is going to grow. I also want to thank my amazing sponsors. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.